Matt, thank you very much for joining me today. Incredibly excited to have you down here in just a couple of weeks. I am looking forward to it. I know the entire team is, and I know a lot of our partners are really excited to meet you as well. So, we've been talking. I've been following you on social media. I've been following you, through our chat. Where on earth are you in the world today? Because you've got like 40 days of travel. Where are you?
Yeah. I've got 40 days, 6 home, and then another 30. But yeah, I'm right now, so it's 70 something. But I'm now in Denver. I'm actually at Exchange. I'm in the hotel. I'm in between board meetings, and then now going to a booth time and a dinner. But just wanted to get some time in with you until I see you next week. So it's exciting to be here.
We really appreciate it, and I hope that your family remember what you look like by the time you get back, because that's a long time on the road.
My beautiful wife is at least over there, and my two very late teen age children don't seem to care as much, so it should work out fine.
Yeah, well, that's good that she gets to join you on some of these. But no, I really appreciate you taking the time. Look, I'm excited. You and I caught up the other day, and you educated me, and I walked away from that conversation feeling so incredibly pumped to be a part of this journey with Pax8 Down Under. And I wanted to just pick your brain and hear what is going on in the world of cybersecurity in North America. What are you seeing? What are the trends? What is happening over there? And what can we expect to start seeing here down in Australia as well? So why don't we just kick off with, what are the themes? What are you seeing? What's going on in the world and in your world from all of these cities in North America, you say?
Well, the one thing I would say is I would describe it as a bit of a renaissance. And what I mean by that is we have, as MSPs in the United States, for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, really gotten good at efficiency, really gotten good at EBITDA, at profitability, and all of those things, all that orchestration, gotten really good at that. There's an awakening to risk. And what I mean by that is we've thought of cybersecurity as a problem that we meet with point products or with things that just kind of do their job. And we kind of just offered them with no real reason why. And we're starting to see this massive shift both in regulation and MSPs and the way they're driving and the customers consuming it into much more of a risk-oriented understanding. Basically saying, if I have this much risk and I only am okay with this much risk, I need to figure out how to deal with these things. And that's driven this just extremely massive growth in cybersecurity and the understanding of what is cybersecurity. I teach a class every I think it's once a month, and it's an 8-hour class, 4 days. And I ask MSPs at the beginning, what's your rank? Where do you put yourself 1 to 10 on understanding of what is cybersecurity? And I've never had anybody above a 7, and I think that's probably real and honest. But I had this one gentleman who was actually running a cybersecurity and incident response company, and he did the class and he went through it and understood. And it's basically on applying CIS controls, applying the family of body of knowledge of CIS. And he walked out and he said, Matt, I'm a 4. I was wrong. And I think that's just kind of the nature of where we are today, James, in the sense that the totality of what it takes to actually secure ourselves in a way that's defensible, and we'll get into that in a bit, is starting to be understood. And it's daunting, and it's huge, and it's larger than we thought, and it's ambitious, and it's all the things. But it's coming at a time, James, where we as MSPs are becoming commoditized. I don't know if you're super technical, but if you used to set IRQ ports on cards and we used to have to install, we had to install drivers or stuff didn't work, and you saw that systemically be commoditized away. You fire up a laptop, it just works. Even if you install Windows 11 on it, it just kind of works. You don't have any driver challenges for the most part. But if you think about what that means for us, our value proposition as MSPs, that efficiency at making your computer work, has no value. And so as you see that pivot, we're seeing this growth in the understanding of our job, and our responsibility is to be defensible in how we advise companies to protect themselves. Then you see that being that growth body, and you're going to be using those same skills. And so what people are finding in the MSP community today is that those operational efficiencies, those things that you, James, have preached for like forever, right? That understanding of operations is security. Security is operations. Right. And we're starting to see, most MSPs wake up to that understanding. But at the same time, and I think one of the biggest challenges is the end consumers are more aware of cybersecurity today than they ever have been. And this is not just US. If you start looking at all of North America, or even as you start looking in your market, the cyber insurers are losing, right? They're dying because they're just having to pay out, and they're fighting it, and then they're losing that and changing their policies. right? And you see that driving the market of understanding at the same time while you had a SolarWinds massive supply chain attack that was on the news, Colonial Pipeline in the US, people had no gasoline on the East Coast and they were putting gas in trash bags, James. Like legitimately, they had film of people panicking and putting gasoline in a trash bag and putting it in the trunk and watching it like fall through because it eats through it, like genuinely panic. And so it's for the first time in the US, we've seen multiple back-to-back incidents of actually understanding, hey, maybe this cybersecurity thing's a risk. Maybe we have some problems here as a nation. And you're seeing, both us in the US, but also all of the Five Eyes communities develop legislation. There's new legislation right now in Australia trying to define critical things to most Australians. What keeps our lights on? What makes us get food? What keeps the water running? Right? Those critical pieces. But then they're extending it to understand that all of those things are impacted by cybersecurity. And all of those things are impacted by poor code design, by supply chain risk, by all of these things. And so you have this motion where at the same time the government's figuring it out, the insurers are figuring it out, the equity markets are also putting legislations in place or regulations in place, and the consumers are understanding. So you have this like perfect storm that is creating a security renaissance, at least in the United States, in the MSP, SMB to mid-market space. And in some rights is making these enterprises that think they have it figured out start to look back and potentially reassess as well due to some of that motion. So that's kind of the state of the union, if you will, if that term lands where in Australia. I'm going to learn that here soon. So.
Yeah, very, very much. And again, we're seeing a lot of that in terms of the rise of ransomware and email compromises, phishing attacks, and it's getting scary out there. Yeah, it is good on one hand that we're all becoming awakened to a lot of the challenges out there. But when we look at the traditional MSP business, there's been this potentially separation in terms of, hey, I'm your MSP. I'm not necessarily going to get involved with a lot of the security pieces. There's some cybersecurity companies that may be the specialist. But are you seeing that's beginning to merge? Are you seeing that actually, if you touch on technology, that you've got a responsibility for it?
You stop reading my diary, James Burgle. You stop reading my diary. I like to talk about this as a convergence.
Yeah.
It's this simple premise, right? What is cybersecurity?
Yeah.
It's protecting data. Data is the lifeblood of our companies, and it's not that abstract. It's actually someone's social. It's actually intellectual property or drawings and things like that. Yeah. And so the conversation is, and I'm actually doing a long-form conversation about this on the 31st, right before I leave to head your way, diving deep into MSP versus MSSP, because I don't believe there's a distinction in those, especially in our mid-market and below. I think the understanding the MSP is saying, I'm not at risk here. I don't have to touch the security because I'm just doing the data part. You're the one that left the door open for the threat actor. You're the one that didn't implement the things that needed to be done. You're the one that didn't understand the risk and the regulatory requirements for that data, or even understand how it's flowed, or where it's used, or what exists, what are they even gathering. So you have this kind of piece where you're starting to realize you can't deliver security if you don't understand what you're securing and how you're securing it, right? And at the same time, you have this inability to kind of understand that as cybersecurity is changing and this risk is changing, how do I deliver this in a way that's defensible? And so you're seeing this convergence of MSP and MSSP. And what I mean by that is like, do I believe that in the future you will have someone that says, I'm going to just do MDR, managed detection and response, or SOC as a service, or something like that, and you buy it as an MSP? Sure. But I don't think there's, in the US especially, the ability to say, I'm going to write the risk off and I'm not going to handle it. I'll give you some examples. So you have one of the things that's playing out is this False Claims Act. In the United States, there's the ability for the Department of Justice to sue you for lying about a contract to them. And they've found a new and unique way. That's been around for a long time. But that is now being applied to cybersecurity, saying, did you meet the reasonable person rule, which is just this understanding, this is an international understanding of if people that your peers are able to look at this and say, yep, a reasonable person would expect that you did what was necessary to protect that data. They're saying they're suing you for not meeting that reasonable person rule when interacting with the government, especially around 800-171. The most recent case was Aerodyne Rocket Jet for $90 billion that turned into a $9 million or so fine. But the key point of that was a whistleblower is what turned that on. An internal person that said that company's lying about 800-171 was what was able to make 30% of that return in the United States. You also have in the United States and this is global too, but you have Travelers Insurance for the first time ever has sued to have a policy rescinded. Now, the difference between paying a policy and then now saying this was obtained under fraud, we want to sue you, we want the money back. But what we really want is the ability to set a case precedence that we can now say if you lied or if you somehow misstated your insurability, then we're not going to pay it. And furthermore, we're going to act like it was obtained under fraud. And the way that typically works, at least in most insurance markets, is return of premiums, right? Essentially, you get your premiums back that you've paid. But in this case, they had a $3 million claim that is being sued over for a rescission. And once that case exists, then you now have more and more precedents. The other term that you need to understand, and this is also somewhat of an international term, is subrogation. It's this understanding that if I get in a car wreck and this car hit this car, this is insurance A and insurance B, they pay, and then they figure out who owes what on the back end. And they start to determine fault, and they start to have those conversations of who's responsible for this litigiousness. And MSPs are starting to see that. The insurance forms are now asking you to sign that you have MFA, now asking you to say that you have this, these pieces in place, that you're using SaaS, you're using VPNs, you're using all these different things. And it's them trying to figure out a hardening insurance market that's losing. And as they start taking those losses, it's not all that unheard of to believe that you would have some insurable risk for the service you provided, regardless of what you put in your hold harmless with your legal side. And so you start getting into this world where you're responsible for it no matter what. Another great example in the U.S. that also has a parallel in Australia that's starting to be developed is there's a Critical Infrastructure Reporting Act now saying that I have to be able to report on a cybersecurity incident. Well, who owns that? You don't think that's the MSP? Guess what? In the United States, it was 100% defined as the MSP. They did not define an MSSP. They said MSP, and they were very specific. And one of the things that I love about Australia is they're part of the Five Eyes community, which means that the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada are all in the UK are all sharing threat intelligence, are all sharing information around cyber, are all sharing the problem at the same time. And you watch each of these divisions release very similar stuff at the same time. It seems like, CERCIA was passed for us in March, and it looks like you guys are going through that push right now. And so the point is, the painting on the wall for me is that as cybersecurity goes further forward, our job is not to protect our client's network. Yeah, I'll let everybody get shocked by that. It's not. It's not to protect our client's network as an MSP. Our job is to be defensible in how we chose to do that as an MSP, right? In the sense that, you're a smart guy, James, and so you come in and say, you know what, you probably ought to buy a backup from DropSuite. Let's get this thing backed up. And you can give some business cases, and you can talk about operations, you can talk about all those things, right? You're very good at describing that, but you're still not applying it to something as an external resource. And what I mean by that is Center for Internet Security, NIST CSF, you have the Essential 8, you have all these things coming together to try to give you pragmatic external advice to say, hey, dummy, do this first. Hey, guys, do this second. And they're starting to give out that path that now you can say, why was I selling backup? Well, because Control 3 said I need to, right? Or Control 10 says I need antivirus and EDR. And Control 15 says maybe I ought to ask Pax8 about their security practices because they could be a risk to me. It's that breadth of understanding that we're starting to see frameworks that if you apply them, it comes down to this in court. And I use this as an example. If I was to say, why did you install SentinelOne, Matt? Man, it's the new hotness. People are loving it. It's that fire. Everybody loves SentinelOne, and man, it really is good. I heard good protection stuff, and their price is right, and you can add it. And it's versus, well, we're working on the framework under CIS, and CIS 10 and 10.1 and 10.2 first say that I have to have EDR, and it must somehow be learning, the ability to find things that are heuristic or different. But it also goes on to say that I need to have a centralized console. I need to have policy management that can do automatic updates, and these. Which one is more defensible in court when you say, I picked SentinelOne because it met all of those, right? Like what a difference in that from a defensibility perspective. And so I like to say that, going all the way back to your question, MSP versus MSSP, I believe there will be service providers. Like look at SentinelOne, they have an MDR that they call vigilance, right? And you have Novasite, you have all these things. And I will be the master chef. I will have to be the coach of that rugby team, right? I will have to actually put all those things together to make them be able to be a winning team. And I think that's the piece where I call that a convergence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So just to clarify, and it's meant in my mind, so the concept of being defensible is in the court of law, you need to be able to defend yourself and say, hey, these are the steps that I took that a reasonable person that is educated can say, yes, I believe that you did the best effort to protect this environment, and you've put the right people, the right technology, the right process in place, and this particular breach that was a human error, that was someone that had been through the training and still didn't apply what they'd learned, and we are actually going to extract you from liability in this particular situation.
Yeah, or certainly tell a good enough story that you're not found negligent, and a good enough story that you can have that conversation. And it's not just the court of law. That's a great way to think about it. I do agree. But it's additionally like this concept of, I have this theory called the middle theory, James, and it basically says any product will never rise much above or stay very far below for long any mature consuming entity, or the maturity of the consuming entity. Meaning, if I have a very low maturity consumer, I can give them crap. But if they get better, I'll have to raise my standards. And if I stay well below their standards, I'll fail. And if I go well above it, there's no capitalistic reason. I don't get anything for it, right? I just spend and I don't win. So you have the market kind of setting that stage. And so you have this world where as that maturity rises, as you start to see the MSPs that you talk to every day, look back 5 years ago, close your eyes and think about where the MSPs were in Australia and look at where they are today. Look at the delineation in that maturity. So I feel like because of this renaissance of security and because of this growth and this understanding, really driven by ransomware and business email compromises and all those things, right? But as you see that rapid growth, you're starting to see that maturity plunge way upward, right? And so as that happens, you have to have defensible answers for that mature consumer. As they start asking me, what are you doing to help me with my insurance premiums this year? How are you? You have to have mature answers. And so the reasonable person rule is great. It's a great way to frame it. And it's a great way to understand defensibility. But it's also defensibility to your peers. It's defensibility to your clients. It's defensibility to those things. As that maturity starts to rise, you have to be iteratively closer to being more and more mature in that space to be able to answer those things. You're also seeing this kind of path forward where transparency and humility are rewarded. Even if you're saying I suck, like even if you're saying I'm really bad at this, that transparency and humility are very much rewarded right now in business. And you're starting to see with cybersecurity, it's even more. Look at Microsoft. 10 years ago, as a cybersecurity guy, I would have told you I never would believe what I'm saying today. But Microsoft came out after the SolarWinds attack and said right away, our source code was breached. We had threat actors here. There's no business incentive for them to do that. But Microsoft is starting to see their consumer maturity rising. Yeah. And the questions are being kicked around in MSP's hands of, is Kaseya a risk to me? Is X a risk to me? Is Pax8 a risk to me? Are these and so I think that's the other side of that coin, James, is defensibility is the ability to showcase that you're staying ahead of innovation debt and you're staying ahead of technical debt, which we could get into for a couple hours. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is fantastic. Lots of golden nuggets here. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper because I want to put myself in the shoes of an MSP. They've been running their business for a number of years, really, really good at core IT infrastructure management and help desk services. They're looking to get into a defensible strategy. They want to be defensible. There's frameworks out there. There's the ASD Essential 8, there's NIST, there's the CIS. Are there any of those that you think are more relevant for an MSP to apply their methodology to? And is it? And the second part of that question is there anything else other than the frameworks that they should be taking on board as part of building out their strategy?
Yeah, great question. So yes, I'm quite partial to CIS for that. The reason I say that is NIST is great. It's the United States National Institute of Standards and Technologies, but it's also responsible for my watch keeping time. So because of that, and if you don't know, there's a lab right up the street from me in Boulder that has the atomic clock that then tracks and sets the standard for the United States and the world of what is time. But the problem is, because of that, they're extremely scientific. And they put out extremely hard to follow frameworks that make you have to do a lot of conjecture and learning in space. And I don't dislike them. I love NIST CSF. I love 800-171, 53, all of those extensibilities. But CIS says, hey, stupid, do this first. Like genuinely. Control 1 says, find a way to track the assets. Like very, very pragmatic, applicable methodologies. So what I like to tell MSPs to do is start at CIS Control 1 and go Control 1 and then do the IG1s first. So CIS is broken into implementation groups. Do this first, get a basis. Come back later, learn this a little more better. Come back later, learn this a little more better, right? And you start getting into this world where it's an iterative improvement. And the reason I like that is start where you are, even if you suck, is very transparent. It's very humble. And it's a great place to not let perfect be the enemy of good. So many times I see MSPs say, I'm going to perfectly get my stack. I'm going to do all my CIS. And then they do nothing because they get so overwhelmed by the overall breadth of doing it perfect that they never deliver what is just good. And if you start with what is just good, you can improve that and you can make it better and better and you can stay ahead of the innovation debt. So I like CIS because it's extremely pragmatic. And if you start with something as simple as make a list of all your computers on an Excel sheet, that can improve to the only way a computer can ever enter my asset space is if it is signing into Azure Active Directory and it is bound to Azure Active Directory. It's managed by Intune. It has all these systems installed. It has every single tool installed. And once it's bringing in, it can only stay that way until I release it and it never goes away. What a difference in how you're tracking assets of asset on paper that I write down and Matt Lee, who's an idiot, misses something and doesn't update it, versus systemic automatic denial of access to data unless you're already a known asset. That's what I mean by that is CIS can improve. But back to your question, it starts with have an asset list. It goes to have a list of your software. It goes to have a way to protect the data, which is your backup side. Back to you, James, right? Number 3. Number 4 coming, and I know your history, that's why I speak towards it. But number 4, and it continues to build on itself, account management, access management, all the core layers. And so if you walk through that and get those muscles flexed, right? My football coach and your rugby coach probably don't just toss somebody in without giving any strength capabilities or understanding the moves or the rules of the game and how it plays. And those are the kind of things where I feel like CIS does a very good job of saying, do implementation group 1 because it's easy. Once you've got that, come back and do 2, and then come back and do 3, 1 through 18, 3 times. Once you've done that, you'll find most of those CIS controls map to NIST CISF. They map to 80171. They map to these other things. And then you can take those muscles and improve them. Now, I'm talking about that 3 to 5 year picture. Yeah. But in between, there's also an opportunity with CIS in that because it is so pragmatic and says, hey, have a firewall, stupid. Like that's genuinely one of them, okay? Like let's just make it simple. Have backup. It's so pragmatic and so simple. You can go sit in front of your customer with those distilled down pieces, just like the Essential 8 tries to do, right? And does a good job in my mind too. But say, here's why this is what I have to deliver to protect you. Here's why, here's the risk, right? Yeah. And then you can make a plan. Hey, I already cover 1, 2, 6, 10, 14, and 16. We're going to build in some work on 2. I need to do an asset inventory with you. Can we sit down and do a business impact analysis and talk about every software you own? Let's get into, you see it as part of a QBR process. You can see that as part of how you might strategically deliver improvement over time to your company. And you start to see a world where CIS is applicable to us and then applicable also to how we might dumb it down a little bit and have that conversation with clients in a way that's meaningful.
Awesome. Your background, and you mentioned it, you've come from helping to build a substantial Mssp and security company across North America. Do you want to just quickly tell us your journey and what you did? And I then want to leave it, how should we be thinking about packaging up these security offerings? I want to talk a little bit about and get your thoughts on how do we determine what is the good, better, best, or the big.
Or the mandatory and then extra and then, super attacked, right? Or whatever. But I'll give you my quick backstory. So I actually started at a break fix company that was before Mssp really in 2011, just under $1 million in revenue, tons of break fix, good clients, but block hours, normal stuff in that way. And I realized very quickly I wanted to be an MSP and I wanted to own an MSP. So instead of working for one, I kind of said I was leaving. And my CEO said, let's put your money where your mouth is. You can invest. And I did. So I bought in 80,000 USD back in 2011. And we grew that from 7 employees and just under $1 million in revenue over the course of the next 10 years to 170 employees in 5 states, covering 20,000 endpoints at 40 million. And as you see that shift, we learned through that all of those things you talk about that a lot of your Australian MSPs are great at, right? The operational maturity, the capabilities to deliver service, that kind of developing some kind of stack and getting things in non-block time and managed services and growing that space and getting more and more efficient on EBITDA and getting more and more efficient on W-2 multipliers and cost. I guess that's a US term, but on cost of employee multipliers of what you put out. And as you see that, as we merged to become a $20 million entity in revenue, got punched in the face. My eyes used to point in the same direction, but after that, they started, doing this, right? But we bought an MSP down in Southern Texas or Eastern Texas, and they had a cyber event about 3 weeks after we bought them. And it was the basis of my origin story as an MSP owner / investor, if you will, I guess, at that point, and a worker in that security space. I sent out an email when I was approved to be the head of security at the company. And I sent an email to 170 employees and said, hey, my single greatest fears were the next MSP that gets pwned and destroyed completely across the board. All of our clients are ransomed. The R Evil ransomware gang was big. I think Conti was pretty big at that time. Amaze was huge at that time. And this was in 2019. And we suffered a ransomware event on that company that totally encrypted their companies 2 days later. So I sent out this email. The next day, this guy reaches out and says, hey, Matt, I'm in your Florida office, which we didn't have a Florida office yet. And I actually am that same fear. And it turned out he was this acquired company that was in Eastern Texas, had a Florida division. And they had a ransomware event 7 months earlier. And it wasn't even done. The lawsuits weren't done. You know how I know? Because I went through those lawsuits for 18 months, right? After our event. And so after we bought them, and after I sent out that email, and the guy tells me this, I call the board and I said, listen, one of two things has happened here, y'all. Either A, they misrepresented their entire situation and didn't tell you about this incident they had back in February, or every one of you are idiots. And I expected to be fired. I did. I genuinely thought it was out, Matt. But they didn't. And in fact, they turned around and actually kind of mansplained to me and said, hey, Matt, you don't understand risk. That risk isn't in our doors. We bought this company with an understanding that it was only the assets. We bought this company with an insurance policy to protect us against further subrogation and litigation from the former event. Like, just don't worry, pretty guy. Sit back in the corner there, security guy, right? And so Friday night, I get a text message from our sales manager, Nick Nyberg, and he says, Matt, you have to understand this just happened. Your single greatest fear came true. I said, guys, just because I was a jerk yesterday, you ain't got called and pull my chain on Friday afternoon. And he quickly said, no, Matt, it's not a joke. We seriously just had a ransomware event on the company we just bought. As it turned out, and after the year and a half of digging into this, we realized that that company had actually been ransomed 3 times and that they had never cleaned up or done any due diligence or any incident response or anything to dig into the forensics or hired anyone to figure anything out. And the threat actor just kept coming back to the well. The threat actor was R Evil. The threat actor was Soda Nokibi, and it just kept coming back to the well. And we didn't have to disclose it because at this time we didn't have any breach, right? Breach is a bad word, and you should never say it. But at this time we didn't have it as a breach because they weren't doing double extortion at that time. They didn't start that till December of 2019. But I then spent the next 18 months systematically losing every client, systematically losing every employee for that company, and losing over $1 million in the course of the beginning of that. And what that got for me was a sword that was razor sharp and hot as hellfire, with the ability to set up an MSP with those things and general things like principles of least privilege, meaning James probably shouldn't have admin to Pax8 because he's not in the role that needs it. Applying those things to technicians, taking away admin rights, doing all those things, and kind of doing them from my hip, just shooting from a little bit of the, I think this is pragmatic. But as time went on, I started applying it from CIS, I started applying it from NIST, and I started applying it from SOC 2. And we started looking at that from a security first way to both secure our house and then also deliver at scale to our customers some of that growth and capabilities and education, which is really hard. And so I spent most of my time responding to incidents. I ran our incident response team at that company. We did 67 named incidents across the corp over the next 2 years. And then as we sold, which we successfully equity exited, I got my commas. I'm very happy about that. But as we sold, I really wanted to know where I could do the greatest good. And what I really wanted to do was say, I just spent the time building a hyper secure MSP that's really scalable and really profitable. How can I do that for others? How can I make my value worth more? And what drives me, James, is my kids and your kids and their grandkids will not have the same virgin experience with technology that we did. We picked up this phone, we leaned in, right? We did everything. We just went hard in the paint. We absolutely drove into that, and things worked. I fired up Angry Birds and it just worked, right? And so we're starting to see this world where if we don't protect that, our children will not have the same life. We can't hemorrhage money like this. We can't lose constantly. We can't leave data unprotected. We can't drive into system failure, or water doesn't work today because it's not functional, or the electricity's out. You can't build a world on that technology. So what my mission is to educate, because I can't do it alone. Right, and drive MSPs to understand how to deliver that in a way that's meaningful and profitable. And I think there's a ton of profit in it too, so don't get me wrong, right? But I really think that's the solve for this cybersecurity challenge is that MSP growth and education. So that's my backstory. That's kind of where I come from. At Pax8, I spend most of my time doing this kind of stuff, external resource education, direct education. I teach a few CIS classes and things like that, but
That's an awesome mission, an awesome why, and I literally got goosebumps right now hearing you talk, because that's why you get up in the morning. You've got a cause and a meaning bigger than yourself, and
100%.
an incredible way to help make the world a better place, and I can see you doing that. So just, you're going to be coming down here and telling this story to 8 cities across Australia and New Zealand. Incredibly happy and excited, because what you've got, your experience is going to really, really help our partner base to hopefully extend your mission into the Australian marketplace and inspire others to.
And you've got some awesome humans there, man. Like, I've been meeting with some of your security focused people, and one of them is going to be doing the back half of this presentation with me, or for us, of those 8 cities. And there's some rock stars. There's some people that genuinely, in my opinion, which is everybody's got one, get it. They get it. And you talk about getting goosebumps. I got goosebumps meeting some of your humans that you've decided to bring on the team there. I just know you're going to be in good hands. So I'm excited.
Yeah, we've got a great team. It's incredible. That's super important to me, is to be working with good people, do good business with good people, and be on a good mission. And
man.
Into. So that's awesome. Look, I want to ask one more question, just for some thought-provoking ideas for those that are listening. And I want you to expand on this when you get down here as well. But
sure.
You've just, and I want to go back to the first step. So for those partners that are going, okay, cool, I've heard of the ASD Essential 8, I've heard of this framework, it's many in North America. What would you suggest are the top 1 to 2 tips that someone can take away from today, someone that's potentially looking to go from just being a standard MSP to actually being a security-first MSP? What step would they take today to make a difference tomorrow?
I would only make one delineation, that everyone should be doing this, regardless of what their intention is. That being said, it starts with this, and we just got done talking about this at Exchange here in Denver. The first thing you should do, and I know this is antithesis, this is against the rules for selling product. The first thing you should do is get more out of what you have now. Most of the time, you have some product that you've not implemented fully. How many shiny toy syndromes do MSPs have? Right? I bought 50, 60 tools and never used half of them past this one point. So the first thing I would start with is just start by looking at what you can get out of what you already have that you are not implementing. Like, take an example. Back in the backup days from Datto, right? You could do the first piece and just do the backup, but if you're not taking advantage of screenshots and booting it up and testing those things on some basis, then you're not benefiting from it fully. So that's the first piece. Now, how do I do that, Matt? Well, dummy, I just said it. Use CIS. So the second piece is take a framework, CIS, Essential 8. I don't care. I genuinely don't. Take a framework, take everything we just talked about before, and ensure what it's meeting out of that framework and what it is not. What that'll do for you is start to build a basis of your gaps. That'll start to build a gap analysis of what do I not do. If I already think I have a pretty good ability to manage assets, control 1, is it written down? Is there a policy? What's my improvement on that? Is it actually being followed? Right? So that's the next step. So it's comparing it to the frameworks. What that will give you is the stuff you have to buy. That'll give you what you have to buy, because you'll now know this is my gap. And the other problem you're struggling with is, like, how do I make a stack and what do I sell to my customers? The end target has to meet their risk, and the end target has to meet your risk profile. And so the answer is, the stack isn't good, better, best. It's each of the ways I'm going to frame what you first have to do to get these pieces. Here's the next iterative step. And if you carry more risk, here's the next iterative step. And it's starting to tie those in and broaden even the good, better, best. Like, when we were at my former MSP, I added like 16 products over time, because I realized there's just stuff I couldn't do. There were things I had to meet and I couldn't do. And we started to take away some of those challenges of having that conversation with customers, because I'm not just coming back and, there was this term, a buddy of mine named Carl was known as $2 Carl, because every time he come back to his customer, it was $2 more. I need $2 more for this. I need $3 for drop suite. I need $2 more for Sentinel One. I need $4 more. There was $2 Carl, right? And the challenge is, instead of that, it's now a plan. Now it's, here's the top 18 things we have to cover. Here's the 56 IG1 subcontrols and the 100 or the 99 IG2 and 3s. And you only need IG1s, Mr. Miss Client. Here's the 18. Let's start through this. And here's the tools I already cover. And here's the pieces I already do for you. We need to do these. And as you're doing that, you start seeing that now I'm not $2 Carl. I'm explaining to you a plan strategically ahead of time, and then I'm driving towards it. And so, to distill that back to what's that, third point, it's really use frameworks and then find the gaps and come up with a business plan of how you're going to deal with them. Some of that will be internalizing it, paying for it, and just adding it to the cost per month of the stack. Some of that will be a sell-through motion that you're going to have to get their buy-in for, that you're going to have a conversation. You have to drive them down that path, or you're going to have to change them to a new plan next year that includes those things. It's that iterative understanding of that. I actually met this one MSP that did it so cool. He defined each year as a version. So this is 2021 stack 1 or 2 or 3. But next year, we're going to be in 2022. You can never be more than 2 years behind. If you are, you're fired. You're done as a client. So you have this iteration, and how do I take them through it? How do I improve? But also, how do I teach them that stuff changes? The bad guys are just as much in business to make money as you. It is an entrepreneur that is going to find a failure, that is going to fix that failure, that is going to find a gap, and is going to fix that gap. They're going to find creative ways to attack you and steal money from you, and they're going to do that on a constant basis. That means we have to be. So the challenge is, when you look at that, you start with know what you have and make sure it's deployed fully. Right? Tie it to something that you can reference to your person as an outside body, like a framework. Find out what you need to buy and buy it, and find ways to sell it, and find ways to bring it to market, right? And essentially, other than that, learn. Keep learning, keep learning, keep learning, keep learning. We raised, James, $185 million in Pax8 to drive some of this change. And, everybody talks about the money they've raised. I'd rather talk about what we're doing with it. We're spending money on developing education. We bought a company in C-level ops, right, to be able to drive operational understanding. You know why? Guess what? Newsflash. Security is not tools. Security is operations. When you get down to it, we know that we have to educate you. We have to continue to grow your market. We have to continue to educate the James Burgles of the world. We have to continue to drive the understanding of what it takes to deliver security. And so those are the 4 things, right? It really does come down to use what you have, assess what you need, assess what you're missing, right? And continue to educate yourself so that whole process isn't just a turd, right? And I think that's, kind of the point, is that we have to be able to take ourselves through this constant improvement model as MSPs. And to where do you start? It really is be honest, be transparent, be humble, tell yourself where you really are, right? And move forward from there. When I teach my CIS class and policy writing class, I tell people, start where you are. Like, write down a really bad process that you can follow. It's far better than a really good process you have zero chance of following, right? And I think that point is just, we're seeing this kind of rapid humility in our world. And, that's my point to MSPs, is start where you are, be humble about it, and grow and continue to stretch that knowledge and kind of be able to change with this. Because I think we have a big cliff coming if you don't as an MSP.
Awesome. Matt, that was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your time, and incredibly excited to meet you face to face in a couple of weeks, and excited for the Australian.
I'm fatter in person, James.
I don't believe it.
Hands up. Oh, man. No, it's great. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And see you soon. Thanks, Matt.
See you.
Take care.